Counter-Narrative News, bringing you the third in the special series on Walter Rodney, which will be continuing through sharing extracts from the book Walter Rodney Speaks, published by Africa World Press and the Institute of the Black World from 1990. And this section is on page 10, and the subtitle is The Dynamism of the Jamaican People. So just going to read this tract and then a few comments arising from that. A start quote. The second element that was important to my development was my experience of the Jamaican people, who are a breed apart in my estimation of any people. Students from the Eastern Caribbean who went to university in Jamaica were struck by the dynamism of the people in Jamaica. There is a different pace of life in Jamaica, probably due to the fact that the population is larger and more concentrated, but there's definitely a greater pace. Trinidadians try to assume the role of city slickers almost and are clever and fast, but for staying power, for sheer energy, Jamaican people seem to have us all beat. It's not surprising that there should be a universalizing tendency when different Caribbean people get together to fall into certain Jamaican idioms. Certainly, to use the swear words, Jamaicans can curse more proficiently than any other Caribbean people. They have such a range of words describing phenomena so neatly, and I think this is a testimony to their combativeness. So that I always felt that there must be tremendous revolutionary potential in that island. One also saw it when it went to London. The Jamaicans were the largest group in London, and they were also the most important group. I would really say that their sense of combativeness nipped British racism in the bud. Jamaicans had a way of striking back that did not brook too much playing about. I think that if in those formative years, the small black population of Britain had quietly submitted to some of the things that a few Englishmen were putting on them, then such practices would have become more generalized and white people would have walked all over black people at any time. But Jamaicans would behave in what I used to think was an amazingly bellicose and provocative manner, given the conditions of disadvantage in strength. We blacks were few and the whites were many, but Jamaicans would take on a whole railway station if necessary and would move forward to single out a white man, snatch him and hit him. The lesson was learned. After a while, when you met people in England and you said you were from the West Indies, they would say, you're a Jamaican. Some Guyanese and Trinidadians got a little upset at this because they were also supposed to be a little bit more rowdy and thought of us as and those of us who thought we were more urbane didn't want to be called a Jamaican. It was a put down. But for others, we recognized that it was also a form of protection because the Jamaican brothers were out there in the street defending the whole race, as it were. And I knew for sure that people, not just Jamaicans, but all of us West Indians who could defend themselves in that way and who would come straight from a rural environment, sell their land in St. Kitts or in some little island in the Grenadines and come to London and start over, run the underground system, run the buses, run the hospitals, take over the schools. People who could do that clearly were people who had almost unlimited capacity for change. This wasn't being taught inside the context of the Caribbean. End of quote. Really fascinating tract, and so much can be said. Obviously, one of the immediate comments to be made is that Walter Rodney of Guyanese heritage, former British Guyana of the colonised by the Brits, he had real influence in Jamaica amongst revolutionary black power socialist oriented students, but also in the shanty towns and amongst the unemployed proletariat and the most oppressed sections of the proletariat, including in the Rastafari community. Walter Rodney promoted this idea of the quote-unquote guerrilla intellectual, not to be caught up in the colonial white academy, but to be breaking out of that, to counter that, to be at the grassroots, to talk in a way, to talk about revolution analysis, strategy and tactics in a way that could be understood by any brother or sister in the neighborhoods on a working class street level. So he had such influence. He was banned by the Jamaican government in the late 60s, and the next day after the ban there was several days of uprisings that led to millions of pounds of damage, called the Rodney riots. Now, to this tract, this extract from Walter Rodney Speaks, in the British context, Jamaican youth, Walter Rodney is absolutely correct, they have been at the vanguard of a radical black working class militant self-defense and assertive struggle since the 1960s. Their culture, their music, their cultural, political, social swagger really help to raise the confidence of all oppressed working class people, including African heritage people, people from the Caribbean, African and Asian, mixed heritage, or African or Asian Caribbean, but also Asian youth as well. Their music also reflected that in terms of the reggae and the ragga sound system culture, and the music and the sound system movements themselves, which were a form of grassroots resistance, and sometimes very direct resistance when it came to the police crackdown and resistance against that, particularly in the 70s and 80s, epitomized by the fantastic film called Babylon, made in 1980, if one is not mistaken, featuring Brinsley Ford. So that's a really, really important kind of document in moving image that really conveys what Walter Rodney is saying here about Jamaicans and the comments that we are making subsequent to that. And so then also in terms of the musical general popular forms as well, it's already mentioned how important reggae was in terms of that, of the assertive revolutionary confidence that it brings to people in general, and particularly oppressed people fighting against racism and colonial capitalism, but also the way that youth in a black youth working class led pioneering spontaneous movements from the grassroots produced new genres and articulations of that same Jamaican based reggae sound system culture. Hip hop is that itself, with a reggae DJ starting that movement in New York, but also here in terms of the rave music, house and garage, grime, dubstep, more recently even trap. These are all manifestations, new pioneering manifestations of basically reggae sound system culture. What has changed in recent years and decade or two has been a sudden collapse of radicalism of the Jamaican working class youth. It's still there, but because of the general political balance of forces, it's gone down with the general descent of the socialist grassroots movements and political movements anyway. However, the summer of 22 showed that this kind of black resistance defined by Jamaicans, but it's, as Walter Rodney reflects himself, it's much wider than Jamaicans in terms of how they deposit that radical political culture. It showed the summer of 2020 when Toby Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon and his types turned on black youth, that they just got smacked down left, right and centre. Be it Billy Steele, the provocation, the disgusting Nazi provocation against the 3 black teenagers on the tube, be it June the 13th, 2020, be it other provocations by Tommy Robinson's lot against black youth and other youth in the BLM movement. It showed again that potential is still there, but that it's still very much a potential, and the attack on that Caribbean community, including the Jamaicans, in the way that the Windrush generation have been attacked and messed around with their status here in terms of residency and nationality. That's very much a revenge of the British state against that historic Jamaican-led resistance movement here in Britain. But it also has not seen the type of very sophisticated, witty, strategic approaches from the Jamaican-led communities, particularly the youth, in a counter-response resistance to the attack on the Windrush generation, indicating some of the problematics of political balance of forces where we are today. Hope that was of interest. Please do check out our previous 2 videos on Walter Rodney. That's Walter Rodney commenting on the British left, and also another video as well on Walter Rodney commenting on Indians in Guyana as well, which is another very interesting video. There will be more on this series. Please do give your feedback. Thanks for those who have given us feedback on this particular series before. Lots of positive feedback. Thank you. Do make further suggestions as well. We wish you a fantastic day. Thank you.